Hello, authors, book lovers, and storytellers. Welcome to another Reader's Magnet featured author interview. Now, we are currently live in all our streaming platforms. That's YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. My name is Rob, and I am your host for today. And with me is the author of the book Letters from World War II. So let's embark on a riveting journey through the pages of this extraordinary book in a box filled with letters, telegrams, and wartime documents with a vivid narrative of her parents' lives. So please help me welcome Miss Barbara Jane Hannon. Barbara, how are you feeling today?
I'm great. I'm great.
Good to hear. So, for some of our viewers though that who are not aware, Barbara, can you please show us your book and tell us what is it all about?
So here's my book. This is a picture of my parents. It's actually their wedding picture. You can
Mhm.
see that my dad here is in the uniform of a World War II 8th Air Force officer. And my parents were married June 19th, 1943. My father was a navigator on a B 17 bomber stationed in England. On his 16th mission, he was shot down. He was captured by the Germans. He spent 16 months in a German prison camp and then was rescued in this very dramatic rescue. He and the other 8,000 prisoners in this camp that was clear up on the Baltic Sea. They were rescued under the nose of the Russians in a
Mm.
very dramatic rescue. So the interesting thing for me is I
Mhm.
am their daughter. These are my parents. And I
Mhm.
am a post World War II generation child, meaning my parents, like a lot of World War II veterans who experienced some horrific times during World War II, once they came home, they got on with their lives.
Mhm.
They put it all behind them and they never talked about it. My parents never talked to us about what happened to them in World War II. We knew a few things. My dad would make comments. When it
Mhm.
was time to go to bed as little
Mhm.
kids, my dad would clap his hands and say, Mach schnell, walk fast, move fast.
Oh.
And I asked him once, and he said, I heard it every single day in prison camp. So
Mm.
we knew that. We used to celebrate Jump Day every January 11th, clear up until the time my dad died on January 11th. He'd come down from upstairs and say, It's Jump Day, let's have pancakes. It was a family holiday. But, as little kids, all we knew about Jump Day is that our dad jumped out of an airplane with a parachute. We didn't
Mm.
have any idea what he was doing on a plane.
Mhm.
Why he had to jump out of we didn't know because they never talked about it. They
Mm.
just never talked about it. So what happened is you sort of mentioned when my mother died, my sisters
Mhm.
and I were cleaning out her house that she lived in for over 60 years. And
Oh.
we found two boxes in the back of her closet. One of those boxes was full of letters that she and my dad sent each other from 1942 to 1945. And they were grouped and tied with ribbons. I looked at them.
Mhm.
I was, what are these?
Mm.
And then um, I closed the box, decided I would take it to my house. And when I had time, eventually go through it and read it. The other box, however, was a wooden box. I opened the top of this wooden box and it was crammed to the top with the most historic documents, all from World War II. There were telegrams,
Mhm.
and they were Gold Star telegrams to my mother. There were communications from the War Department. My dad's prisoner of war documents from Stalag Luft 1, all in German, were in here.
Mhm.
Were flight records from every flight he ever went on, medical records. There was a commendation from Winston Churchill for 3 flights he went
Mm.
on where he was the lead navigator for the 381st Division. And then I
Okay.
found a pile of French francs, and I Googled them, and they were wartime French francs.
Mm.
I looked at those and was stunned. I said to one of my sisters, "When was Daddy in France?" He was in a prison camp in Germany. What
Okay.
was he doing in France? How did he get to France? What is the deal here? And I became just obsessed with trying to figure out this story. And
Mm.
I had never really thought about it. And the very first telegram that I picked up, if you've
Okay.
ever seen a World War II telegram, they're from Western Union. They're kind of a pink color and they're tissue-like.
Okay.
And this one had two big gold stars on it. And I Googled Western Union. Any telegram in World War II with two gold stars on it meant it came from the War Department. And I looked at
Mm.
this telegram, and it was dated January 26th, 1944. So at
Oh.
this point, I didn't even know when my dad, I knew he was shot down on January 11th, but 1944, I had no idea, 45. I looked at this telegram to my mother that said, "The Secretary of War would like to inform you that your husband, Lieutenant George Hannon, has been missing over Germany
Mm.
since January 11th." And I knew that. I was like, it was 1944. But I looked at the date of the telegram. It was January 26th. My mother
Oh.
didn't know for 2 weeks that he'd been
Mm.
shot down and was missing. So then I hunted through the box and I found a second telegram from February 18th,
Mm.
which said, "Your husband has been reported by the International Red Cross as a prisoner of the Germans." So my mother did not know for 37 days if he was dead or alive. And then in February, all she knew was that he was reported as a prisoner of war of the Germans. No confirmation. And knowing my mother, I could just see
Mm-hmm.
her. Where is he? Is he hurt? Does he have medical care? It's winter. Does he warm clothes? Does he have what's happening? She did not
Mm.
know until April that he was at Stalag Luft 1 in Barth, Germany.
Wow.
So I basically was stunned. I was like,
Mm.
wait a minute. He was in this prison camp for 16 months. I
Mm.
did not know that. So then the research started. I still was not thinking about writing a book, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was trying to put the story together. And it took me 2 years of research to figure out exactly what happened to him. I wrote to the National Archives in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Every plane that went down in World War II had an MACR report, missing air crew report, written
Mm-hmm.
after the war. I wrote for this. It came in the mail, and there is my dad's writing because he was interviewed after the war. What happened to your plane? Why was it shot
Mm.
down? Where all of this? Did everybody get out? No, everybody did not get out. In this
Okay.
report, the radio man whose desk, my dad was a navigator, so in a B-17, he sat closest to the radio man. And it said that Lieutenant George Hannon got up from his desk and found the radio man slumped over the radio. He was dead. He was cold. He was blue, clear bullet hole. And I can't tell you, Rob, thinking about my dad at that young age, getting up, seeing his friend that he had gone on
Yeah.
all these flights with dead. But anyway, the plane
Mm.
was shot, they believe, by German fighters, and both engines were out. And observers in other B-17s said they counted 9 chutes come out of the plane. So
Mm-hmm.
then
Wow.
my research was, what happened? He jumped out. Then what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Where'd he go? So I spent an inordinate amount of time researching the 8th Air Force, the 381st, what it was like for my dad to be up in this plane every day being chased by German fighters and flak and shot at. And
Hmm.
I think when my dad was flying, which was 43 and 44, early 1944, that was way before the 8th Air Force, the US 8th Air Force, got control of the skies over Germany and
Hmm.
were able to make it a bit safer. When my dad was flying, it was a slaughterhouse. And
Wow.
I did not know, and I think maybe people out there don't know what it was like for these guys. The 8th Air Force lost more airmen than the entire Marine Corps because it was just a slaughterhouse. If you only had when my dad was flying, he only had about a 1 in 4 chance of survival,
Mm.
25%. If you jumped out of a plane in a combat zone where there were, you know, planes fighting all around you and flak, you only had a 60% chance of even making it to the ground. So
Wow.
I'm just trying to paint this picture for me as what,
Mm.
no idea. So I got on a plane and I went over to Ridgewell Air Base in England and met with the curator of the museum at Ridgewell Air Base to learn more about what it was like for people like my dad flying
Hmm.
at this air base. You know, the runways are still there. You can stand on them. And then this past October, I went to Bart, Germany, to the
Mm.
place where my dad's prison camp was. And they have a very
Mm.
small museum there and a curator. And then I started learning about what happened at this prison camp. My dad was starved at this prison camp. These guys were starved, and it was fairly brutal.
Hmm.
I had his prisoner of war records, and I had to find someone who could translate them into German. And
Oh.
so I had this guy read it to me, and he turned the page over and he showed it to me, and he said, "Barbara, you see this right here?" And there were just a bunch of dates in German. And he
Hmm.
said, "These are punishments.
Mm.
Punishments. These are the dates your dad was punished." So I contacted this guy who ran the museum at Bart, and he said, "Oh, yeah, these guys, digging tunnels. If they mouthed off to a German guard, they were put in solitary without food for a week." Um,
Hmm.
the brutality of it all, and then reading the Red Cross reports, they were allowed to go into this camp, all of the camps, every 4 months by the Germans, and they wrote reports, that these guys were dressed in rags. Their shoes had holes in them. They did not have enough light bulbs for light. They were not being
Hmm.
fed. Um, they had, I mean, it was really brutal to find out what happened to my dad. And then I was looking through his medical records, and when he went to Santa Ana to flight school, he was 165 pounds,
Oh.
165, 5'5", 165. He was not a big man.
Hmm.
When he arrived in France after being rescued from this camp, my dad weighed 118 pounds.
He lost a lot of weight.
So let's think
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah, sure.
These guys were starved. So I just spent a lot of time putting what happened in this prison camp, but I had not started reading the letters. So in
Mm.
your questions, you asked, what was the hardest part? And I will tell you, the hardest part was reading my parents' letters.
Oh.
These were my parents' letters. And I
Okay.
felt a little like a voyeur, maybe. I don't know. It was very difficult for me to start reading them. First of all, they're your parents.
Of course.
You don't expect these kinds of love letters. Lots of them were just these intense love letters because they were separated. They got married. They had a week's honeymoon, and then there's a letter from my mom to my dad that she got home to Iowa safely. So she got married. She was a married woman, spent a week in San Francisco with my dad. Then she had to get on a train all by herself, come all the way back cross country to Iowa. And she was writing him, I'm home safely. And then 2 weeks later, he wrote her and said, I think I'm flying out next week. And then he flew off to England. She didn't see him for over 2 years. So I thought, because I did not know this timeline, this kind of sacrifice from my parents, it was stunning. So I began reading the letters. I read them in order because my mother had grouped them in order. And when I started reading the letters from England, they start out, and my father is so excited. He's writing her these letters. We went to London. I saw Buckingham Palace. I saw Westminster Abbey. We went to Piccadilly Square. He's clearly excited. His first few flights, he's writing to my mother. Today we flew over Denmark and Belgium and he's excited. But as time goes on, his letters clearly, he's frightened, and he is writing to my mother. It gets harder and harder to get up in the plane, darling. Always called her darling, because you don't know what's going to happen, and your life hangs in the balance until you return to the coast of England. Yeah. And then he wrote, but I signed up for this, and I will do it to the best of my ability, no matter what happens. When he wrote that letter, it was the very next mission he flew that he was shot down on. Whether he had like a premonition, I don't know. Yeah. But as I learned more about what it was like for these guys, I just thought about my dad. Because I didn't know the story, I thought I would have liked to ask him, but I didn't know. Right? I couldn't ask him because I didn't know. So I got through all the letters, and then all of his letters from prison camp were there. I didn't even know he could write my mom from prison camp, and they were letters. They didn't have envelopes. They folded with a tab stuck in them, and you undid the tab, and they were German on the front, mit Luftpost. And then some of these letters he would write, and then all of a sudden it'd be all black. And then you could read some more. I held them up to the light to see if I could read through this black. And everything everything he wrote her was censored by the Germans. So they read every letter. He couldn't say how bad things were. They censor it. Of course. My mother's letters to him were the same way. I picked up a letter. He saved every letter he wrote her. She wrote him in prison camp. And one of them was about my uncle. And my mother had started with something Norman was just sent to, and it was all black. So obviously the Germans read her letters. So it was very interesting. So about writing a book, I never meant to write a book. My interest, I have to tell you, were these documents. These are really historical documents. These telegrams are 80 years old. The communications from the War Department, this commendation from Winston Churchill that he signed, Winston Churchill, my dad's name on it. These documents are so historic, and some of them were beginning to fade. Like all the letters my dad wrote my mom were in pencil. He didn't have a fountain pen. Prison camp, and they were beginning to fade. So my goal, Rob, was I have to preserve this stuff, right? So I
understandable.
I got a desktop scanner, and then I started scanning these documents into a digital file to save them forever, right? That's my point. But as I started scanning letters, documents,
Hmm.
I realized nobody is going to know what this file is. Nobody's going to know what this document is. I know because I've done the research. So then what I had to start doing was explain the document. You know, these are his flight records from Ridgewell Air Base in England. Well, then
Okay.
I had to start talking about Ridgewell Air Base. Where was it? What was going on? You know, so this story started on the documents, you know,
Mm.
and so from there, I found this file getting bigger and bigger and bigger with a story about each document and the letters, and I had to explain the letters, you know.
Hmm.
The one thing that was very hard for them is my dad, every time he got a letter from my mother in prison camp, wrote the date he received it. So I could look at the post date, the date she
Okay.
posted it, and discover that it took 4 months, four
Before she.
months for
Oh.
a letter from my mom to get to my dad. And it took 4 months for a letter from my dad to get to my mom. All the mail had to go through Stalag Luft 3 first. Then it was put on a train and sent to my dad's prison camp. But as the war got worse for the Germans and their train rails and everything were being
Hmm.
bombed, they couldn't move mail.
Yeah.
So the whole thing about the letters is that they could not keep on a conversation. You know,
Yeah.
like my dad wrote my mother that he had made it to the finals. My dad was a chess player, to the
Okay.
finals of the all camp chess tournament.
Mm.
He wrote that. By the
Hmm.
time my mother got the letter 4 months later, and then she wrote him, "Did you win?" in this letter,
Okay.
and he got the letter 4 months later, they couldn't carry on a conversation in these
Yeah.
letters. So instead, they just wrote love letters, and it was all positive, all about the future. You know, the most poignant letters were the letters they wrote each other for 4 Christmas Eves in a row when they were apart. Every
Mm.
Christmas Eve, they wrote each other, you know, the same thing. "Dear darling, I know in my heart this is the last Christmas we'll ever be apart, and then we'll be together for every Christmas we're allowed." But of course, another year went by and they were apart
Yeah.
again. Those were very difficult letters, but all of their letters to each other were all about the future, when we'll be together, our life will be wonderful, we have so many things to do, we'll travel, all of
Hmm.
these positive letters. So one of the reasons I decided to write a book was to put all this
Yes.
stuff together. I initially was only going to print a few copies for my sisters, their children, their grandchildren, and now their great grandchildren, so they would
Hey.
know the story. So that
Mm.
was my initial idea, is I'll just print a few copies, I'll self-publish it. And then I started getting questions from people who knew my parents. My parents lived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa for 60 years after the
Hmm.
war. My dad was well known. My mother was a teacher. And I posted the book, and suddenly my mom's students were like emailing me saying, "I had your mom in 8th grade. I want to read her story." And I realized that their story was really important. Number
Mm.
one, this is an astounding generation. People call them the greatest generation. My mom and dad, 4 years separation in a prison camp, almost died in this prison camp, apart, maybe almost didn't get rescued because of the Russians. And yet, in not one letter is there any anger in
Hmm.
these letters. There's no whining, like, "Why me? Why did this happen to us?" There's
Yeah.
no rate. There is only the stuff that my dad wrote. Like, "I
Mm.
signed up for this and I will do it to the best of my ability." You know, no anger, no just nothing but positive words. We will see each other again. This positive from both of them. You know, in one letter, my mom wrote, "Dear darling, you wait there and I'll wait here. And
Wow.
one day, we will never have to wait again. We will be able to look at each other and say, next time, never again will we ever
Wow.
have to say, next time I see you." These positive letters. And I, knowing my
Mm,
dad, know my mom's letters. Some of her letters are so chatty, you know.
okay.
Miriam and I went shopping. We did this. You know, I bought some stuff for the house. George, when you come back and we have our house, I bought an electric mixer, you know, chatty stuff. Florence says hi. I planted tomatoes. They're looking, I mean, just this
Mm,
chatty stuff. And I can't help but think that's what my dad wanted to read, right?
yeah.
Normal
Yeah.
life. So that's why I wrote the book and published it. I just don't think that we should ever forget what this generation went through, you know, what they
Yeah.
went to,
Agreed.
and they did it with no rage, no anger, no crying. They did it with such grace and courage. I mean,
Hmm.
I look at my dad. My dad was so brave, and I
Yeah.
never got a chance to tell him. So I just think their story is timeless. Two ordinary people, just two ordinary people, you know, a teacher, and my dad worked for the Chicago Rock Island Railroad as a freight manager. Just two ordinary people, grew up in Iowa, you know, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and extraordinary things happened to them, and they dealt with it incredibly. They dealt with it with such unbelievable courage and grace. And I just wish I would have known. It took 2 years to put the story together. So that's my book. And as
Well,
I said, I never meant to write it. It just sort of happened. And I wrote it for them. I wrote it for them. I'm very
hey,
proud of them.
hey, Barbara, I know that they're really proud of you because it's again, it's one thing that you keeping them their documents, saving it because this is their how do you say this? It's their memories that they want to share to you. But you discovering it, knowing what they went through, and you putting it into a book is something that a lot of people don't have the privilege of. And there's one thing, if I can tell you, Barbara, is if they're looking at you right now, they're really proud of what you did. They're happy that you're preserving a story, and their story will be passed on through generations. And me on my hand, one thing I can say is I am flabbergasted. I felt sad. I felt happy, but I felt motivated hearing the story, knowing that your father, even though he went through all of this stuff, he still had that positive outlook. As what you said, no
Mhm.
whining, no complaining. I signed up for this, so I'm doing my best, as I think everyone should do as well. Your father can be an inspiration to a lot of people. We
I
just
think
don't know
so.
yet. But he is.
People,
He is an
people,
inspiration.
people today get angry
Mhm.
about the smallest
Yes.
things sometimes, road
Hmm.
rage, whatever. My dad and my mom had reason to be angry and upset. Mm-mm, nope,
No.
just
They just it
we're
they
gonna get
it's like
through
they said
this.
just
Yeah,
yeah.
so we
They
can
said
learn from it for sure.
we can really learn from them. And I think your dad has this mode like it is what it is. I'm being giving my cards have been dealt. Now let me play with them. It was more of like
Exactly.
he's a brave man and he is a
Mhm.
father that you can be proud of. That's one thing I can say, Barbara.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I wish I could have
Hey,
told him. Never
hey,
knew.
don't worry. You never know, but hey, he's listening. He might be listening, but I know it's not might, but he is listening, and I do know that. So you don't need to worry about that. So, you know what? To all of our viewers, though, thank you very much for sharing that, Barbara. It was again, it is really a riveting story that you have gone through, and I do know that even scanning those pages, knowing your history of your father and your mom, though, was really heart wrenching on your end. But the
Mhm.
courage for you to continue doing it and share it to the world and be that inspiration to other people is one thing. I do understand now why you tell us that you're not an author. Your idea was not to write a book,
Mhm.
but but the idea of this story being shared is one thing that I can say is the best move that you had done. And we are looking forward to at least know more about this, talk more about this. But to all our viewers there, again, this is Barbara Jane Hannon, author of the book Letters of World War II, which is available through Amazon and Barnes& and Noble. So grab a copy now, and also you can explore the journey from her perspective, Barbara herself. So Barbara, thank you so much for sharing. It was nice to have you on the show. Thank you very much,
Thanks.
Barbara. So, by the way, so everyone, so till next time, everyone, and remember, as we say here at Readers Magnet, we share stories with the world. Have a good one.